Hello there everyone, Yell here, and as you can see, I've updated my outfit. Hope you guys like. Since most of the votes have been for this one, this is the one I'll be going with, as the votes change that. And tonight, I'll be reacting to Norn-Queens and the monstrous way in which a Tyranid army is birthed, Warhammer 40k lore by Arch. Nearly call him Arch Warhammer. I'm still kind of getting used to the fact that he just goes by Arch now. But that aside, I highly recommend his content. He really knows the lore, and also puts it in an entertaining way. And as always, there'll be a link to the original video in the description box below. But without further ado, let's see what he has to say about the queens.
Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to some more Warhammer 40k lore. Well, today, we're going to talk about rapid-fire pregnancies. Oh yes, the Norn-Queens of the Tyranid hive fleets. You just count your blessings that we're not going to talk about the Skaven females today.
For those who don't know, Skaven females are, oh boy, they're something. As me and my friends like to call them, barrel rat.
So, Tyranids. They're one of the factions that it's kind of difficult to talk about lore with because, well, they don't really have a whole lot of personality or history beyond what they did to other factions. You know, there is no Tyranid perspective beyond Hungary, which is... it's just somewhat of a storytelling dead end, really. But the Norn-Queens had a pit.
Yeah, that's kind of the unfortunate thing about the fact that their entire, drive is behind feeding and expanding. Something. They don't really have any reason to record or any of this sort of history entry, I assume. And if they do record it, it is more than likely going to be in the knowledge of the hive mind itself, which, well, the hive mind doesn't really have any reason to be giving tales of its exploits in other galaxies and how it devoured them to anyone in the Milky Way, unless, of course, whereas they start having the gene sealer cults, talk about that stuff to try and demoralize soldiers, but I digress.
Different because they are probably the closest to an overall guiding leadership that the Tyranids have. Now, they are not true individuals. They are not even truly independent, not even in the way of a swarm lord, really, but they are... well, they might, in fact, be the actual overarching, guiding and directing leadership of the Tyranid hordes. We don't actually know for certain. It is entirely possible that the Norn-Queens make up the Tyranid hive mind together, having a series of queens that all govern the hive, so to say.
Which would also make sense because you also taking into account how the higher up the hierarchy a Tyranid synapse creature is, usually the greater the psychic backlash when it gets killed. And to my knowledge, nothing causes a higher level of psychic backlash among the Tyranids than when a Norn-Queen gets killed.
Alternatively, they could simply just be another node in the network. We just don't know because, well, interrogating Tyranid prisoners have proven to be rather goddamn difficult, being wild animals, etc.
That's assuming they're even alive to interrogate, because there are certain Tyranid organisms, like, if I remember correctly, the Rippers. Yeah, the Rippers, they don't even physically function outside of the hive mind. And if what I've read is correct, apparently they require the influence of the hive mind just for their biological functions to even continue.
But the Norn-Queens are nevertheless some of the greatest strategic leaders of the Tyranid hive fleets. They are the ones whose needs dictate the fleet's movements, because they need to be fed constantly with fresh biomaterial to create the countless organisms that make up the world's scouring armies of the hive minds. And without the Norn-Queens, of course, those self-same armies will grind to a halt awfully quickly, as the Tyranid's primary strength is their ability to simply kinda just keep swamping whatever is in their way. Because at the end of the day, if you are devouring an entire planet's biological material, then the casualties you take are probably going to be insignificant regardless. Imagine.
There's also the fact that the Tyranids eat their own dead in order to reclaim lost biomass, and when they're done, we'll have the various Tyranid organisms that fought on the planet, such as, the Termagants and so on, jump into the reclamation pools, be broken back down into biomass that's then fed back up into the fleet.
The amount of little Tyranid gaunts need to die just to make up for the biomaterial loss of all trees on Earth, for example. This is one of those damnable issues with the Tyranid hive fleet. Bleeding them dry is almost impossible because the amount of resources they gain from seizing a world is almost certain to be in order of magnitudes greater than any quantity that you can actually extricate from them on the defensive. Which is why the Inquisition have taken to simply just virus bombing entire planets, preferably after the Tyranids have started their assimilation process, so as to maximize the loss of biological material.
I agree with that, and in my opinion, that's what Cryptman should have done.
But these are, of course, more immediate strategic concerns for the Swarm Lords to consider. The primary duties of the Norn-Queens are to pick up on this psychic broadcast being sent out by various scouting organisms, like gene stealers or gene stealer cults, currently assimilating their way into Imperial or other alien societies. Again, this is where we come into that question as to, are the Norn-Queens actually the leaders of the Tyranid hordes, or merely an instrument of them? Personally, I prefer a little bit of a middle-of-the-road interpretation, because here's the thing. The Norn-Queens give birth to all of the regular Tyranid bioorganisms. This includes the Hive Tyrants, the Swarm Lords, and all the way down to Rippers and Gaunts, and all the way up to Bio-Titans. However, it does not include the Hive ships themselves. Which means, theoretically, that somewhere out there beyond the rims of the galaxy, there is a really, really fat Norn-Queen producing entire warships from her vulva.
Yeah, that is something to consider personally. I always had the assumption that assumption maybe theory that that rather than being birthed at full size, that the various ships in the Hive fleet it would be is created in a smaller form, potentially molded from biomass as outside of the Norn-Queen's body somewhere, and then grow to their full size. But yeah, considering considering how the Tyranids tend to just birth things, yeah, that would make sense that they just have a suit like this absolutely massive organism birthing in entire hive ships for the fleets. And if that is true, then it would imply that the hive fleets, in addition to filling the biomass needs, it's for their own, like to produce their own troops and all that, and to just provide themselves with energy, that they also have to secure enough to essentially bring back home to feed whatever organisms are making the actual ships.
I bet you that's a mental image you didn't expect to imagine today, and yet, here we are. No, actually, oh, my apologies. I misspoke. I meant, of course, Volve us. As the average Norn-Queen can have dozens of the damn things, continuously pumping out new bioorganisms. Because here's the thing, right? If you've got one Norn-Queen, that's cute and all, but how many Tyranids can one Norn-Queen give birth to? Even assuming that every orifice is pumping out eggs or larvae consistently and non-stop. Yes, we are talking about vaginas and eggs and larvae here. Excuse me. Right, I'm good now. Let's continue to talk about how the sausage is made, and whether or not the Norn-Queens are capable of producing Tyranid armies rapidly enough to be of strategic and tactical value to their generals, the Swarmlords.
Well, from what I have heard, and I don't know if this is true or not, this is just something I've heard, that the termagants and hormagons, that they and certain other Tyranid organisms may be birthed in advance and kept in essentially a state of stasis, sort of, where they're just dormant until they're needed. And which, if that is true, that would reduce the burden on the Norn-Queens to birth an entire invasion force just as needed every time they invade a planet. Although actually thinking about it, it would make sense for them to be birthing things at incredible speed too, with multiple methods, with multiple basically with the multiple reproductive organs and whatnot, because since their modus operandi involves sending an attack, that attack force is usually going to be largely wiped out, and then using the information gained, refine the next wave. Yeah, that refinement would require some high speed in birthing.
There are going to be different types of Norn-Queens giving birth to different kind of specialities. A Bio-Titan, for example, is going to require a significantly larger exit hole than a Ripper. Duh. There is also going to be
that Bio-Titan thing also raised some questions, because as I've also heard bits of lore about, well, that Bio-Titans would sometimes carry Norn-Queens with them into battle, which personally I do not see as a good idea, considering that it would put a Norn-Queen in the line of fire, and, it'd be pretty easy for the defenders to just go, see that thing over there? I want you to focus all fire on it. Because anyone who knows what happens when a Synapse creature dies is going to know, take out a Norn-Queen, and you're going to wipe out a lot of the Tyranids really quickly. And until they recover via the Hydra effect, they're going to be in chaos.
Specialized orifices for the creation of eggs contra larva, for example. But let us assume that each Norn-Queen can produce smaller organisms like gaunts at a rate of 1 per minute per orifice. Assuming no birthing breaks, that would give us some 720 new gaunts every single hour. Now, the gestation period might also then vary. The gaunts might not arrive fully formed and ready to fight. They might need to have their weapons birthed to them as well, for example. The adrenal glands used by the little hormagaunts, they need to be birthed separately. The flesh borer weapons used by the termagaunts also need to be born separately as well. So for sake of equipment and armament, let us cut that in half, shall we? Just to be on the pessimistic side. So what we're looking at then is roughly 360 fully equipped little snappy, angry baby monsters per hour. Which would, of course, again in turn translate into 8,640 little warrior beasts over the course of 24 hours, a single day. That would be the rough equivalent of a reinforced brigade or a small division in modern military terms. Which is quite a lot. Really, genuinely quite a lot. If one were to convert that into weight, for example, with each gaunt weighing in at about 200 odd kilograms, you would be looking at 1,728 tons of fighters produced every day. Or 3,809,587 pounds of vicious predator.
But that's assuming that they're all around the size of things like, the gaunts. I assume then and that they might potentially be less as for something like, say, a Carnifex.
That's a lot. I mean, at this point, we're starting to worry about carry capacity on the hive ships. And also, these would be kept in a state of suspended animation. They might even be produced as eggs, for example, and then simply not hatched until they are acquired. Because if they were to all be birthed at once, well, they'd probably eat all the food above the hive ships in actual days. That's another problem. There is also probably the likely complication of...
Huh. So what I heard about them being in stasis, this might be right after all.
varying gestation times for various types of creatures. Obviously, a swarm lord, with all of its incredible information and intelligence, is going to require a lot longer to fully mature than a gaunt, which is simply just a predatory, scaly missile you point towards the enemy and say, eat. Something like a zonothrope is going to take far longer than a carnifex. The carnifex is going to take far longer than a gaunt, and a biotitan is obviously going to take far longer than anything else. If the Tyranids are smart, they'll stock up on a variety of critters well before they arrive at the place that they're about to invade, making sure that they can essentially defrost whatever they need when they need them, and then they can simply supply the hordes of smaller organisms on a desirable basis. As the Norn-Queens would absolutely be able to create entire armies of little gaunts very, very quickly. Now, the precise number of Norn-Queens is one that we also don't really quite know, as this has been left up to a lot of authors' discretion, shall we say. For example, we know that the Norn-Queens are extraordinarily important, because every time a Norn-Queen dies, it sends out an enormous psychic shockwave into the warp and via the hive mind's communications network. This backlash effect causes all receiving Tyranid Norn-Queen organisms to immediately stop whatever it is they are doing and begin to create a new queen instead. This has been dubbed the Hydra effect by inquisitorial agents, because it means that whenever you actually kill a Norn-Queen, you lop off a head, well, another God only knows how many thousands will grow back. Now, this is not to say that killing a Norn-Queen is entirely pointless, mind you, because I imagine the amount of biomaterial resources that goes into a Norn-Queen is likely to be the equivalent of a bio-titan. Probably more, bearing in mind here, giving birth to something is a rather complicated process, and quite energy intensive as well. Take, for example, the average human female requires...
There's also time for the gestation of the new Norn-Queen as well. Consider assuming that it's not just birthed out fully functioning, because a Norn-Queen is considerably more intelligent than something like, say, a Biotitan or a Carnifex.
Requires 9 months to produce a baby of some, 2 to 4 kilograms. The Norn-Queen is asked to do the equivalent of that, at least at the immediate birth point, let's assume, every minute. From 12 vaginas. Yeah. However the Norn-Queens are constructed, they're going to be pretty damn complicated creatures. Hell, the energy requirements alone would be ridiculous. Again, the average human pregnancy consumes, 85-odd thousand calories? Imagine burning that over the course of a minute, again, 12 times. That would be the equivalent of like a kilowatt hour of energy being produced every single minute. You could comfortably charge an electric car off this. Assuming you could find somewhere to plug it in, I guess. We are wandering somewhat off the point at this moment right here, but
Also, I imagine actually that this is probably also why it is that the Tyranid in High Fleet drinks the oceans on any planets they go to that have water as well, because so burning that much energy and calories also produces a lot of heat. And if they're burning that much energy that quickly, I imagine that the Norn Queens are going to need quite the method of cooling themselves.
the thing I am getting towards is that even though new Norn-Queens are produced every time one dies, the energy expenditure, the amount of biological resources required to create this very complex biological engine is likely to be astounding, to the point where you could theoretically baby boom the hive mind to death. You're gonna have to kill quite a lot of Norn-Queens to get there, but it is a theoretical possibility.
I wonder, have they ever considered using, like the weapons that the Imperium uses to commit exterminatus? I kind of wonder, have they ever considered trying to use those against bioships once they figure out which one actually has a Norn Queen on it? See if maybe they can just blow that up, and then keep doing that until, as Arch said, just make the High Fleet burn themselves, like burn itself out. Which, granted, that's an ideal situation in a way, because that probably require a lot of those munitions. And there's also the fact that well, I don't know. I actually don't know at what threshold the Hive fleet might just go, okay, time to split up into splinter fleets instead of staying there to keep birthing more Norn queens.
But before we get too far lost, let's return to the question as to whether or not the Norn-Queens can actually create an army on the fly for their Swarm Lord generals. Well, let's say you've got a dozen Norn-Queens, alright? Each one is producing gaunts at the same rate. That would translate into 103,680 gaunts every single day. That's a lot of gaunts. That is a hell of a lot of gaunts. That means that they'd be able to produce over 1,000,000 gaunts in 10 days. Presuming the Hive fleet has been smart enough to save up on some of the more advanced organisms as well, the leaders and the specialists of the Tyranid army, then yes, it seems entirely plausible that a Tyranid invading fleet can actually create an army on the fly whilst it is approaching a planet. Bearing in mind this is one of those derpy cases with 40k, where sometimes approaching a world can take weeks and months, and sometimes hours, so, But again, assuming the Tyranids aren't complete idiots, this would mean that if a...
Also, for those who don't know how the Tyranids do it, because, so from what I've heard, the Tyranids do not travel through the warp in order to do their FTL travel. Instead, they have a special bioship called the Narval or Narwhal, or I don't remember which it's called, but basically, yeah, they use that thing just to create sort of like a gravity funnel to basically slingshot themselves towards a planet.
A fleet gets a couple of weeks warning, maybe even a few months, they can absolutely produce an entire invasion army from scratch within that time period, and continuously reinforce them whilst in theatre at a rate of 100,000 new gaunts every single day. Now, that will, of course, require an obscene amount of biological material in the tens of millions of metric tons every day. But so long as that can actually be supplied and pumped into the Norn-Queens, then yes, I would absolutely say that the Tyranids have the capability to produce an army essentially from scratch in a matter of weeks or months.
Well, considering what the capillary towers do, and the fact that they recycle their own dead, yeah, that's really not too bad because they're going to be recycling any dead Tyranids that they can, plus whatever biomass they get on the planet in the process. Which, by the way, is also why it is that I would highly recommend incinerating the Tyranids where possible to get rid of as much biomass as possible in theater. But unless you happen to have some Adeptosauritas lying around to help you, or or many flamer vehicles just on hand, and it's probably another ideal situation.
And that's assuming a mere dozen Norn-Queens. Imagine if there were 100 of the damn things. Pretty close to 1,000,000 new fighting organisms that could pour down onto a planet's surface every single day. Numbers adjusted, of course, if you need more warriors, or zonothropes, or hive tyrants, or bio-titans, but even so, the sheer amount of material, of biological material that could be produced and dumped into the fight would be ridiculous, and gives you a very good idea of what an absolutely unstoppable foe the Tyranids could be, where we are talking literal oceans of hostile creatures just coming on and on and on in a wave so thick and plentiful you're unlikely to even have enough ammunition to kill them all. Now that is so cool, it's almost worth all of the talk about birthing and monster vulvas that we've already done. The Tyranids. An interesting topic to cover, are they not? Though I will again point out, this is a bit more of a simplified math question right here, because you wouldn't just be producing gaunts. Now, we've already taken into consideration the production of weaponry, and with the weapons come the ammunition, since of course Tyranid weapons will literally have the babies, the ammunition, already inside of the weapon, and the gun itself is capable of producing further babies to fire at the enemy. So we've kind of managed to circumvent a lot of the logistical issues already, but you would obviously need to intersperse some warriors here and there, some hive tyrants, some biovores, some gargoyles, etc., 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 which would take up valuable birthing tube space, and time, and energy, and calories, and biomaterial, and whatever have you. Undoubtedly, too, certain creatures will require more time to fully grow to their maximum potential. Others might even require lengthy gestation periods. Some might require extensive programming, like the Swarm Lords, for example, which are rebirthed with all of their previous memories.
Yep, all the previous memories of every occurrence of the Swarm Lord that has ever been spawned, including probably versions that have been fighting in theaters in entirely different galaxies as well, which is a lot of information to be passing on.
Imagine that's a process that takes quite a lot of time, considering what a complex machine the brain actually is. And if you're producing a genius level intelligence, that sounds like something that's gonna take more than a 5-minute pause, you know? And that's before we start talking about some of the really esoterical shit, like, I remember a mention of teleportation Tyranids. I cannot for the life of me remember where, but I am almost certain there was a mention at some point about Tyranid like worm things that were able to teleport Tyranid organisms. Now, bear you in mind, this could be massively outdated, ancient nonsense lore, because I cannot for the life of me square this particular circle. Because, okay, the Tyranids don't like the warp. In fact, they go out of their way to avoid the warp. They seem to be afraid of the warp and of chaos. And yet they have a creature that can, enter into the warp and cause teleportation phenomenon.
I'd guess less afraid of the warp and more like they don't really want to interact with it because, warp stuff is basically made of energy and like, psychic energy. So it's not really something that they can really draw sustenance from. Similar to why it is that I've heard that they generally avoid Necron tomb worlds, because it's like, well, there's not really much they can get from the tomb worlds, and a whole lot they can lose, considering that Necron weapons disintegrate things.
This is one of those cases where what my brain is telling me seems to be defeated by what the rest of my brain is telling me, but, The point, nevertheless, stands that there are going to be far more complex Tyranid bioorganisms, and so even though they do have a ridiculous production capability, it is not impossible to stem the tide. Killing enough of the big creatures will in turn stem the flow of the little ones, presumably, just as killing enough of the little ones will in turn impact the production of the larger and more complex bioorganisms. Plus, if you manage to actually kill a Norn-Queen, you will be imposing an enormous resource drain on all the other Tyranid vessels, who will then be trying to birth new Norn-Queens. Now, in the long term, that could of course be detrimental, since you are creating further army birthing creatures that could each and every one of them go on a crusade all of their very own to overrun a planet.
Yep, because it only takes like a couple bioships managing to find their way to some, relatively speaking, undefended planet out there, and then set up shop, and then nom the entire populace before you have a full-on hive fleet going around.
But in the short term, presuming you can deal with the influx of enemies, you could actually potentially starve out the Tyranid fleet. See, now I feel the urge to try and figure out how many calories all of the Earth's biomass might be worth to come up with a decent comparison, but honestly, even my autism has limits. Plus, it would open up that whole question again, what exactly is biological matter to the Tyranids? Can they extract energy from coal, from metals? Can they convert them into more biomaterial? I mean, they have all kinds of chitin and nonsense, right? Surely they can use some of that, because...
Well, I assume they can probably use certain metals, such as, iron, copper, or sodium, because those are actually used in the human body, and, are parts of certain compounds that biological creatures make use of, such as hemoglobin. And it is stated that they do strip a planet down to the bedrock in many cases, so I assume that, well, that they can and will just basically eat the dirt as well, actually, especially considering how much biomass in the form of bacteria is actually spread out throughout the soil.
Suddenly, if we're talking about the release of energy from coal as well, well, the total energy potential of a planet is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, sure, we're talking about an expenditure of tens of millions of tons every day here in terms of one-to-one, if we assume one-to-one biological conversion, but for frame of reference here, the Amazon rainforest on Earth covers an area some 3,000 square kilometers. That's a lot of potential nids right there. Planets are big. Planets are really big. In fact, I would think that the largest limiting factor on how many troops a Hive fleet could potentially spawn would probably just be the amount of material that the fleet at large can carry with it. I mean, So, the Norn-Queens, of course, they reside on certain Hive ships. Usually the larger, more well-protected ones are the heart of the fleet, since they are the single most important creature in the entire Tyranid fleet, plus, potentially, the actual literal neuron, so to say, of its hive mind brain. But they must have fuel ships, fuel tankers, the ginormous vessels designed purely to carry biological material through the void. Because again, the sheer quantities we're talking, there's gonna need to be a lot of nutrient sludge somewhere.
So maybe, similar to honeypot ants, and so there's some bioships that function as repletes, and basically are fed the biomass as from a devoured planet, which is probably broken down into the same kind of sludge that can be found in a reclamation, which is normally fed up into the hive feed via the capillary towers, and just yeah, you just have some hive ships if they're just hauling all of that. But considering how much biomass they'd be holding, there, I imagine that they would probably be kept well in the rear of any Tyranid hive fleet to make sure that they stay out of the line of fire of enemy weapons. Because I imagine that if you manage to pop one of those bioships that's filled with biomass, that'd be quite a loss for the Tyranid Hive fleet, unless they can start scooping up all that leaked out into the void.
Enough warm, hot goop to be. Oh, yes, you know where I'm going with this. To be pumped into the fat women to birth more monsters. The cycle of life. Except a pinch more perverse. Now, I'd better not see any Norn-Queen hentai anytime soon, or I swear to God there will be repercussions. But, with that...
Well, I can definitely say that I have not seen any of the Norn-Queens themselves, but there are artists out there who've been taking some, shall we say, liberties with the other Tyranid life forms.
You know a lot more than you ever wanted to know about the Norn-Queens and their capacity for spawning enormous armies on command and on sight whilst invading a planet. And you might get a bit of a better understanding of why it is so damn difficult to stop a Tyranid invasion because, well, it's basically like fighting against the entire biomass of the rainforest times 30. You're simply not going to have enough las packs to put a bolt in each and every one of them.
Yep, and if what I've heard about the armored crest on a Termagant or Hormagaun's head is of an indication, and I've heard that it is designed in such a way as that when they go charging into battle, it is going to be most likely that any projectile hits them is going to hit that crest because the way they run in with their heads lowered, and that it is designed with that in mind, to stop a few rounds. So, in all likelihood, but you're not going to down a Termagant or Hormagant with just one lasgun shot, unless you get lucky and hit a bit lower than the crest, or slightly to the side and actually manage to hit it proper in the head. But yes, but assuming you don't get that ideal shot, which under combat situations is probably going to be most of the time, with how hectic things are, you're probably going to need at least 2 or 3 lasgun shots each, which makes the issue of even having enough shots to kill the Tyranids, much less as having people stay alive long enough to do so, and having enough people to fight back for under those conditions. Yeah, basically, you just get overwhelmed on every front, and you're outnumbered. You don't have the supplies is to keep fighting to the end. And so really the best way to try and actually stop up a high fleet is to try and nip the problem in the bud. While it is still relatively manageable, it would seem.
Till next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.
Well, that was fun to watch, and it also helped me to figure out which bits of the hearsay that I know of is actually true and which might just be nonsense. I hope you guys enjoyed watching with me, and if you did, I'd appreciate if you like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps. And don't forget to check out Arch Warhammer. But until next time, bye-bye!